Greetings YouTube, the author Mark Simmons here, back for my 16th instalment from my readings from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In this episode I'll be reading a snippet from chapter 16 of my second novel, Purged in Flame. In the story so far, our protagonist has survived another night of violence, but now has to return to one of his old battlegrounds from the first book, basically. Purged in Flame is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. As always, I've not rehearsed this, so you'll get all the pauses and ums and the moments of dyslexia. So this is an extract from chapter 16, which is called The Next Target. For the first time in days, there appeared to be no one out on the streets causing mischief. The debris of the earlier problems was still littered all over the roads, but the persons involved had moved on. Whether they were done with their antics, or if they were just in a different part of the city, he would have to wait and see. Whatever the reason for it, Whitfield was happy that he didn't have to dodge any more trouble. They pulled onto a street that Whitfield knew straight away, and as the tall fence loomed over them on their left, his stomach dropped. He knew the place well and had hoped that he wouldn't have to go back so soon. "It was your idea," he complained to himself. As they pulled up alongside the assembly hall, the broken fence panel still stood open. Slowly Kadir pulled into the courtyard, and everything looked like it had been when they left a few nights earlier. Evidently the authorities had been so busy they hadn't had time to check on it. But then why would they? To the average passerby, it just looked like another derelict building. Whitfield couldn't understand why no one would have seen the bodies. But as they drove through the gap in the fence, he could see that nothing was visible from the road. The 3 vans that the invaders had used were still there and were doing a great job hiding the entire scene from the street. Kadir circled the car round so that it was facing the exit, pulling up behind the abandoned vans and keeping them hidden from the old theatre's entrance. She switched the engine off and turned to face the 3 of them, chewing on her lip as she looked over them. "Esther, you're staying in the car." Esther jumped at the sound of her own name, tucking her feet under her body and folding her arms across her chest. The young girl was trying to make herself look as small as possible. Kadir considered her with a turned-up nose and then a look of annoyance. "You stay with her," she pointed at Whitfield. "No chance. I'm coming with you." "I don't think so," Kadir replied, malice in her tone. "Do you have any idea how close I am to running you through the heart right now? If the Baroness is in there, then you have a better chance of speaking to her if I'm with you." Kadir began to respond, but held her tongue. The scowl she threw at him told Whitfield all she knew. The scowl she threw at him told Whitfield that she knew he had a point. She looked over at Shannon, who still lay on her back and was making no effort to contribute to the conversation. "Well, I'm not taking her in there with us," Kadir replied, pointing at Esther. Whitfield saw the response as a feeble attempt to try and win the argument, and it wasn't working. He looked at her with the pity which only seemed to anger Kadir, more as she thumped her fist on the back of Whitfield's seat. "I'll stay with her," Shannon said finally as she sat up. Kadir gave Shannon another quizzical look, but eventually nodded a yes. "And hey, if no one's in there, you can still drive that blade of yours into me." Whitfield tried to diffuse the tension with humour, but Kadir wasn't amused. "You can leave me there with the rest of the bodies," he challenged. Whether that was a wise choice, time would tell. Just remember to come up with a good story for these 2. The banging from the boot returned, and Esther jumped out of her seat. Shannon leant forward and laid a comforting hand on her knee, gently shushing Esther's tears away. "Time to shut him up," Kadir said as she climbed out of the driver's seat. Whitfield wished that he could help Esther in some way, but he had failed in everything he had done with her. Shannon, on the other hand, seemed to have a calming influence on her. "Go," Shannon said to him. "She'll be fine." Whitfield also got out of the car and joined Kadir as she moved to the back of the vehicle. She drew her blade and then pulled and put her hand on the door release button. "You're not going to kill them, are you?" She ignored him and opened the boot. A foot lashed out as it opened, catching Kadir in the thigh. She appeared to hardly notice it and let the door spring open the rest of the way. Her free hand was around the man's throat before he could try to escape. He struggled against her grip, clawing at her fingers, but with one quick jab, she landed the hilt of her blade down onto the top of his head. He went limp. The unconscious man was in his early 20s, with short blonde hair and the soft tufts of a beard along his jawline. Like all the previous recruits of Foreman's army, his mouth had been forced shut. In this man's case, a rough piece of metal had been inserted between his teeth, the edges of it cutting through the sides of his mouth and into his cheeks. The metal had then been bent down over his chin and was held in place by 2 nails driven through the metal into his jaw. Whitfield winced at the sight of the crude gag, but it wasn't the part of the man that intrigued him the most. He was clearly Caucasian, yet his skin had a shade of yellow. "What's wrong with him?" Whitfield said what he was thinking. Kadir looked down at him with little regard. "Aside from the steel halfway down his throat? Obviously. What's up with his skin?" "Jaundice, most likely." Kadir had her teacher's voice on again. "His body is rejecting the AB negative blood. He had transfused into him. Hopefully I can get some information out of him before his body starts to shut down." Kadir slammed the trunk shut. She turned to Whitfield with her weapon pointed at him. "You step where I step, and don't make a sound. Got it?" Whitfield nodded. They kept low as they crept between the vehicles. The weather must have been hot during the days, because the bodies that littered the doorway were kicking up one hell of a stink. Whitfield tried not to look at them, but as they got closer, he knew there was no getting around it. As the notion that they would have to climb over them to get inside became apparent to him, he forced himself to look down at them. Not only were they burnt, torn open and impaled by the spikes sticking up out of the steps, but also it looked like the local wildlife had been nibbling on them. On cue, a swarm of rats darted out from under the corpses. Just like the last time he had stood at these steps, his stomach gave up on him and vacated itself. Kadir paused next to him as he vomited, her eyes always on the entrance. He wiped his chin and signalled that he was ready to continue, although inside he wasn't. The nightmares of the last time he had been in the old theatre were still fresh in his memory, and his first reaction was to take a step back. But they had to go in, and he couldn't leave Kadir to face the Baroness alone. He took a deep breath and then stepped over the dead. There you go. So that's the final chapter of book 2, actually. Hope you enjoyed it. The links to the UK and US versions of the book for Amazon links will be on the. Jesus, I'm screwing this up. Be in the bottom of the in the description of this video, along with my Facebook author page, my Twitter page, my Instagram page. Yeah, let me know what you thought. If you love it, cool. If you hate it, cool. Either way, tell me, and I will. I'll do something about it. Maybe I won't. Cool. All right. Next time.